Hi, good morning. Thank you for having me. And I really appreciate that question because I don't think a lot of us begin our journey thinking that we're going to become advocates, or perhaps, in my case, perhaps probably the chair of an organization. At least not initially. I definitely started to see the need specifically to begin to advocate, not only, excuse me, for language access, but LEP rights, when I saw that there was a very consistent pattern of what I would like to call, fallouts or discrepancies, specifically in the care that LEP patients received. Now, just like many of our colleagues, I too was, of course, a child interpreter. I would interpret for my parents at many a doctor's visit. Some of them, of course, being very specialized visits. Um, and It wasn't just me; it's actually my siblings as well that actually found themselves in the same position um, as I did, having to be child interpreters. But nevertheless, these patterns that I was mentioning earlier kept coming up, and it just seemed that, at least in my case, it just felt like enough is enough. You know what I mean? We have to start advocating more for our LEPs. If it wasn't for them, we would not be in the profession that we're in. And of course, advocacy for me goes well beyond just the interpreted encounter. It's great to interpret in the interpreted encounter. Sorry, let me correct myself. It's important to advocate in the interpreted encounter, but then also to advocate beyond the interpreted encounter. For example, there was a panel that I was on at a hospital where I do work still, and this panel was to essentially analyze why there is such a high readmission rate. What are some of the fallout, some of the discrepancies when it came to care for patients? And of course, there I was able to voice not only my opinion, but the opinion of the Language and Cultural Services Department, as well as, in this particular case, voice the concerns, especially of the migrant, undocumented, and just limited English proficient patients that are seen at that hospital. Uh, Thank you for the question. Now, truth be told, I couldn't do this without my wife and my support system, to be quite honest with you. I would be completely lost without, without her, or my in-laws or my family who have actually stepped up in times where I definitely had, I guess you could say, conflicting things going on at one time. And truthfully, my hat's off to those single parents who manage it, who do it. You know, um, I'm fortunate enough to be in a position where I do have my wife as my support, and we've been able to make it work that way. But of course, that doesn't mean that there aren't times where, of course, my wife has things that she has to do. She works. She has her things that she has to take care of. Now, what I would say in terms of productivity hacks is that what I have done, and what has worked for me, is that I essentially schedule things in blocks. That's one of the things that I have learned to do. Um, I block or compartmentalize my time to allot for I guess you could say, an easier throughput for the different things that I have to do. For example, uh, and not that this is the exact schedule that I follow, but this is just an example. I tend to be an early riser, so the first things that I take care of are generally the administrative things for my work as CEO and president of my own company. Then, of course, by that time, my daughter's usually awake, and so it's, family time from, let's say, for example, 8 o'clock to 10 o'clock. Then from 10 o'clock on to like maybe 12, let's just say, it's more productive time. And generally, I do things in that nature that I can afford to be a little distracted in. Things like content creation, things of that nature, because it actually helps me and my um in my process, because um uh, sometimes I get a little hyper fixated on things, and getting a little distraction actually helps me pull away and actually get a different perspective on it. So I'm always working in the background. So then after that time is usually meetings. And then, of course, after that is more family time. And then, of course, more productive time at the end of the evening. Now, of course, I have a unique advantage, I will say, in that I actually um, have insomnia. Now, I know it's kind of um, sounds a little weird to say that it's an advantage, but in my case, I actually take full advantage during the times where I'm awake and nobody else is. So that's definitely something that I have learned to do there. Now, the other thing too is invest also in a very, very uh, user friendly uh, system. Like, for example, my phone is linked to my computer, so I could access things remotely. So if I am on the go on those days where I do take assignments, or if I'm on site at a hospital, for example, I could take meeting calls from my phone. I can answer email, of course. I can also route calls to staff if I have to. Whatever the case may be, I actually, it's important to actually invest in some technology, or as much technology as you see necessary for your operation. That's definitely something else that I actually learned to do. I do have staff, and they find it a little bit more useful to use it's AI integrated, but they like to use live chat. So on the times where they're not actually available, live chat does actually have a bot that'll actually field certain questions that maybe someone might have. And other times where they are available, then they can actually, not necessarily turn off the bot, but they can actually field the questions themselves, and it'll just be an easier back and forth, of course. um that's one thing that one piece of technology that I do absolutely love. The other one too is that I don't like overcomplicating my life either. So um Google Workspace is in a completely integrated system, so my calendars are all synced together. So so even if I have something in one calendar, I can actually migrate it over to other ones, so I don't put myself down for conflicting things, or have conflicts in my schedule. um I can also access, because I do also do instruction. That's part of my business model, of course. So I have Google Slides where I can actually access all my slides to get, if I ever have to, for any reason, at any point, or I could work on them. That's some of the things that I've integrated. Again, I don't like overcomplicating things, so I try to keep it as simple as possible, and that's what I found that has been useful. Now, in terms of other types of AI, truthfully, I haven't really used too much of it, to be quite honest with you. Oh, well, thank you for that. So I would say, and it actually took me a little bit to figure this out. I mean, I've kind of always known it, but it's kind of hard to integrate into the final product, and that is, of course, not everyone learns the same. Some people are purely visual learners, Some persons or participants prefer to have tangible things that they can read because that's their learning style. Some do audio only. And so one thing that has actually helped get as much in there as possible in one presentation to fit most everybody's learning styles is that I do use other products. They're not AI, but they're nothing fancy, but they're actually very helpful because they have different features. PowerPoint, of course, is one of them, and now it's actually been upgraded. You could put different videos. You can make a QR code out of things and stuff like that with other integrations, which is actually really great. That's something that PowerPoint used to never do. Then I also use Canva, for example, for if I have anything that's rich content, or content-rich videos or anything like that. That's something that I also employ. There are, of course, different fonts that you could use. Like for myself, I don't think I may have mentioned this before, but I don't know if a lot of people actually know this. I'm actually dyslexic. So I actually have to use very specific fonts so that it actually helps me be able to, of course, read a little bit better. Okay. Now I actually have two forms of dyslexia. So there's so I do have to use different other tricks to actually be able to manage that just a little bit better. So I actually incorporate a lot of those fonts into my presentations, not only for my purposes, like in the speaker's notes, for example, but then I also find that for some, it's actually easier to follow along that way. The other thing that I learned, that I also learned early on, is that not everybody appreciates a long laundry list of things. So breaking up content's actually a little bit of an important thing to do as well. And then one other thing, sorry, to make things relatable is actually equally important as well. Now, something that I learned a long time ago, and this is actually it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with interpreting. Long before I became an interpreter, I was an EMT and reserve firefighter. While I was in fire academy, one of my instructors actually taught me what's called the 5 P's. Okay. Now, they're one of the P's I can't actually say, so I'll condense it to 4 P's. Okay. Or I'll keep it at 5, but I'll adjust it to say so that I leave out the expletive that was included in it. Okay. So essentially what it was is that the 5 P's are proper preparation prevents poor, I'll leave the other part alone, performance. Okay. And that's something that I have adopted and continuously used throughout the interpreting career, actually. So I'm a big advocate for knowing as much information as possible, not only terminology wise, but then also, for example, and this leads back to the advocacy topic, is essentially what resources are available for staff members, for example, if there are questions that arise during an encounter. Like, for example, let's just say, for example, and I know a lot of interpreters probably have had this experience, where a provider does actually go out of their way and actually does use either profane, inappropriate, or you could even say anti-immigrant words. Okay. So what reporting tools are available to you, or who can you report it to? I know the immediate, in the short term, a lot of interpreters, especially staff interpreters, would probably report something like that to their supervisor, and their supervisor would advise them on how to go about it. But truth be told, not many supervisors actually know what to do with that either. And so my point to that is to know as much information as possible, reporting tools, different departments, different protocols, for example, for different areas. That all helps in the end with what I call the final product, which is advocacy. That's a very interesting question. I would say that it's highlighted specifically that, well, there is a lot of gray in our work. Okay? Um, in the sense that all of our ethical principles, of course, are meant to be, essentially our guides, right, through the interpreted encounter, or how do we conduct ourselves, and essentially what the decorum is of an interpreter. And of course, it applies across the board, but that it doesn't have the solution for every single situation. And I would say that we could say the pandemic specifically, and then of course very early on in the pandemic, all of well, to put it frankly, all the death that we saw as interpreters, and actually highlighted that there are of course times where we might be compelled to do more than what our scope technically actually provides for. Um, for example, there's actually, even prior to becoming the chair as the secretary of the national board, people have reached out to us and had questions um, about how to navigate all of our ethical principles and square that with our humanity and our moral compasses. And what we did actually was we actually conducted a survey, and part of that actually is incorporated into the presentation that we're going to be putting. We're going to be doing at the Leo conference. But it highlighted that there is a lot more gray than what meets the eye. Now, I would say, in addition to highlighting that there are more gray areas, there are certain things that I would say go beyond just being an interpreter that have also been highlighted. For example, we're always been told that we're part of the treating team, but kind of not part of the treating team. And as part of the treating team, we do abide by the same principles as other medical professionals do. For example, there are specific, well, most of the time they're volunteers. I would actually say this. Most of the time these people are volunteers who actually sit with the well, we'll put it bluntly, the dying. Okay. Or perhaps it's even a staff member, especially in situations where there is no family member or next of kin or anyone that could be with them. And they will sit with them, they will hold their hands so that so actually they die with dignity and not alone. So what's to say that an interpreter, assuming that they don't have anything else that they need to attend to, couldn't do the same thing? I mean, that's just being human. Okay. I as an interpreter have had to do that before. Okay. Or when I have had to do it, I will say I chose to do it more specifically. That's an interesting question, because I don't know that there would be a one size fits all solution to that. So some of the things that are coming down the pipe might actually compel certain health systems that don't necessarily provide interpreter services or language access services to actually provide them. For example, it's still in the works, mind you, but there was a proposal to actually make Medicare Part B funds actually fall under what they would actually call Medicare funds, to actually classify them, so they would fall under the same category as other just general funds that are actually funded by the government. So essentially, it goes back to Title VI, where a healthcare provider, let's just say, who is receiving either funds, whether directly or indirectly, they would actually have to provide language services. Okay. Well, those who accept Medicare Part B, whether it's through a managed care organization or other type of insurance or co-insurance, that's not counted as that. So again, they're trying to there's a proposal that's still being worked on. It's still making its way through Health and Human Services, where that would actually be where it would actually would be the case that would be counted as federal funds, so that they would also be compelled to provide language access. So that's one thing. The other thing too is that, and it's quite unfortunate. I say it's unfortunate because I don't want this to be the case, but if there were to be major litigation, that would also compel a lot of healthcare systems to actually adopt either better or just in general offer language access that is the LEP's right. The other thing too is that I think it would also take a change in culture within organizations that do offer language services, okay? Because it's viewed as either a secondary and sometimes a tertiary thing, okay? Where there is, for example, talking about that panel that I had mentioned earlier, one of the things that was made very apparent is that interpreting and translation services, or what we generally would call language access, isn't really thought of at the same time as this new policy or newer policies or updates are actually being considered. And it's not until panels like that are actually put together where, like, persons like myself will actually say, like, well, okay, so what is in place, or what would be in place to actually address language access in this? And most of the time it doesn't. So that component's always is either missing or sometimes an afterthought. So that would be something that would actually be an effective tool to address, some disparities, and especially the language barrier. Additionally, I think that another great tool that would actually be able to do that as well is for national organizations to collaborate more. That would actually be something that I think would be beneficial to everybody, okay? Where there is room to collaborate, to do so. And then, of course, to support groups and organizations that do actually work with legislators. That would actually be something that would be, I think, that would actually be a very powerful, would send actually a very powerful message to legislators that language access is not only a right, but it's ultimately it is necessary. Thank you for the question. So, in part, what attendees can expect is that, of course, there's a review. There's going to be discussion about advocacy, and of course, what that really means and what that would essentially look like if we were to view advocacy through a couple of different lenses. Then, of course, there is a national survey that we did as the national board, which those results are going to be incorporated into the presentation. And those actually tackle a lot of other questions that a lot of interpreters might have as well, or at the very least, it's going to highlight what a lot of interpreters feel is actually going on. And then the last thing I'll say regarding that is that I'm really looking forward to doing this presentation. Hi, welcome everybody, and I hope to see everybody there at Leo 7. Don't forget to check us out as we present empowering change through advocacy, why it matters. See you all there.